doing a large mixing bowl. So this was a request from one of my studio assistants who used to help me out in my old studio. I always throw large pieces on bats, and I really like these Speedball bats. They're great. They're reinforced on the back so they don't get warpy. The only finicky thing is that they have four different holes on the back with these little knobby things so you can feel the 3 little knobs measure up for my bat pins. So your wheel, if you aren't sure, usually comes with bat pins. And so you want to set the bat, no matter what kind of bat you have, it doesn't matter, and make sure it's nice and flush, right? And then I've got a 7-pound piece of clay. You don't have to make a mixing bowl with 7 pounds. You can certainly do a smaller bowl, but I wanted to do a large scale bowl so that you guys could see. If you watched my wedging video, then you saw me wedge this up with the spiral wedging technique, which I like to finish with just a little bit of a bow on the bottom so that you get a rocky piece of clay like this. And the reason I like to do that is because when I go to set the piece down on the wheel, the force of the weight of the clay, because it's got that convex shape, will actually help it settle down flat so you don't get bubbles underneath the big piece. So. All right, let's get this party started. So I'll start out by, and this is the other reason I like to start out with a bit of a cone shape, is you're kind of already halfway there, because a lot of clay is tough, as most of us know, if you're working your way up to working with bigger pieces of clay. 7 pounds is quite a bit. And I'll come back after I've coned with this method. I really don't cone up and down when I'm working with larger pieces. I just don't find it's necessary. So instead I'll take the heel of my hand like this, and you can see this is starting to mushroom. I don't want that to get more exaggerated than what it is already. My side hand keeps that clay sort of pushed in, and I push down with the heel of my hand. It does take your breath away, and it should. That's how hard you need to push. Adding little bits of water as I go, right, until my walls have come down, and I've got a nice sort of bowl shape from the heel, using the heel of that hand. So now I've avoided having to dig my hole, right? And I already have the shape that I'm looking for in the overall piece. Once it's finished, I've already kind of delineated where things are gonna start from. And then I'll drag the heel of my hand up the side, just to kind of flesh out that interior curve a little bit more. I'm gonna go back with my sponge now, and even again, drawing the sponge, following the curve, coming up the side of the wall, just a little bit of compression. And you have to be careful with these bigger pieces. It's hard to detect exactly how deep you are. You can certainly use the needle tool method of measuring the thickness of the bottom, where you stick your finger down a needle tool, stick the needle tool in the pot, slide your finger down till it connects with the inside of that wall, and that will give you your measurement. So my interior floor is that thick, which is fine. The hole will close back up, so that's not a concern. Right, so now I'm ready to begin starting to bring my walls up. The thing that I try to keep in mind when I'm working with larger pieces of clay is I'm going generally a little slower. My motions are more controlled. If you work with the speed of the wheel too quickly with a large piece and some small minor thing happens, it's a very exaggerated thing, because the wheel, it distorts the piece with that much clay much quicker, I think. Right, so I'll usually start to bring the walls up with a sponge on the outside. I've got just enough water in that sponge, you can see, so that it's not dripping wet, but it does squeeze a little moisture out. You're not going to gain a tremendous amount of height from larger pieces in that first pull like you would from smaller pieces. Usually, if you're making a cup or something, you can get 2/3 of the height in that first pull, but you want to maintain the control over the bigger piece of clay. So I can already feel I've got a little something funky, a little dried piece of clay stuck in the outside of my wall, so I'm going to take that out before it becomes an issue later. It's probably just from, I did some trimming earlier, so I've got little flecks of leather hard clay everywhere. I keep my hands connected to each other. I keep my elbows connected to my body. And I draw my hands nice and slow up towards the rim of the pot. I release the grip as I get to that top inch because I don't want to pinch the rim of the pot too thin. I want to maintain the integrity of that rim by leaving it, thick and sturdy. And it's okay, yes, it's a cylinder at this stage. The bowl shape will come later, but you've got to get the clay up the walls. So the interior still has the bowl shape from when I was using the heel of my hand. So that's good because that'll be a line for us to follow later as we're exaggerating the bowl shape. But right now, my main goal, main objective is to get the clay from the base worked into the walls to gain my height. And I'll take some measurements of this so you know where a 7-pound piece can land. This is a B-Mix 5, so your clay body will be different. There's, as we all know, there's different factors to how large you can make something depending on the weight of your clay. A 7-pound piece in either of the other 2 clay bodies I work with may not land in the same measurements as the B-Mix. Right, I scoop the old water out, the slip water out, and I add fresh water so my walls are slippery all the way down so I don't catch anywhere. And I'm gonna switch to using a sponge inside too. I just find sometimes with the sponges and larger pieces you can get a little bit more compression going on without cutting into the clay like fingertips or knuckles will do, because you have more surface area with a sponge. And the sponge also applies the moisture and helps maintain that level of fluidity on the surface of the clay. I'm always going back, cleaning out the interior, just giving a nice compression, sweeping motion from the center up the right side to make sure that stays a bowl shape on the inside. And then we'll come back again. Patience. Patience is a key to making larger work. Right, so now my hands can't be connected to each other anymore because the walls are too tall. So you'll notice my right elbow is still connected to my side very firmly to maintain stability. And then my left elbow is bent and I'm moving my arm from the shoulder. So I don't have a lot of movement in the wrist, right? Everything is sort of doing this motion. So I'm not getting a lot of fluid motion. I don't want to unbalance the clay in that way. And I find that just keeping that rigid posture through my arms helps things stay nice and centered. The other piece to the puzzle about larger pieces is the second it starts to go off center, it can become very off center in a short manner of time. So you want to constantly maintain control of that, and any little amount of wiggle, you want to go back and really try to assist right away. So now you can see I'm starting to incorporate a little bit of shaping into these next few pulls because my walls are getting thinner. So I'm still coming up, I'm still bringing clay up, but it's much smaller amounts of clay. And I'm using my inside hand a little bit more to push out. So you're starting to get this gentle curve. And that's what I want. Tall-sided mixing bowls. I've had one of these bowls in my house that I made probably 10 years ago now. And it's the only mixing bowl I have aside from a couple of smaller metal mixing bowls. We use it for popcorn, big fruit salads in the summer if we're going to someone's house. Mix all my cake and cookie batter, bread batter, dough, and they clean up so nicely. Right, so just continuing to get that gentle curve. Checking back in, making sure the floor of the pot isn't becoming oversaturated. There's no water, no standing water. You don't want any standing water inside of a pot while you're working on it. All right, and I've still got some girth down here at the bottom. I'm gonna try to bring that in just a smidge more. I'm gonna slow my wheel down a little bit and also begin to exaggerate the shape of the bowl. So as I'm coming up, I'm lifting up, but I'm also lifting in that curved shape with that graceful sweep. Right, and the rim of my pot is still on a little bit of the thicker side, which is what I like. Utilitarian pottery to me, like stuff you're going to use in your home over and over again, should have a little bit of a thicker rim. I just think it makes it more durable, less apt to chipping and that kind of thing. So my walls now are fairly thin in through the main body of the piece. I don't want to go too much thinner, so I'm going to go back with my angled knife and just cut away some of the clay that is superfluous along the outside edge so I can kind of find where the bottom of the pot actually meets the wheel. And I like to do this now before I do the final shaping of the pot so that my final shape of the pot isn't influenced by extra clay that's going to get cut off anyway, right? So, large, flexible Cheryl mud tools. This is the red. I like the red. I use the red more than anything else because they have so much flex and bend in them. They feel like extensions of my fingers. So I'm going to come along the outside of this pot at a medium to slow speed. And I'm just skim coating the outside. My inside hand is just very gently applying a little bit of pressure just to press the wall into that tool. Only enough so that I can remove the slip layer from the outside of the pot. It just gives the pot a little bit more integrity so I can work on finishing it and hopefully it'll stay intact. Right, so now I'm gonna move my foot pedal here so I can readjust. So now I'm gonna come from the inside with the curved side of the tool, big side of the curve down. From the inside top rim of this pot, I've got my wheel spinning fairly slowly. And this is how I shape the interior bowl. So I'm looking at the interior of the pot. I can see exactly what's happening the whole time. I'm not concerned too much with what's happening on the outside because hopefully I've pulled my walls thin enough that the two are mimicking one another and making sense. Right, so lots of slip comes off on that first go round, which is good. The less water and moisture you've got, the more your pot will sustain on the wheel. So now I'm going to come from the bottom up. Right, another bit of slip comes off on that go around. And I can tell I've got a little bit of a thinner spot in the top of my wall, so I'm going to try to just stretch this out to meet for overall shape, right? And I could go a little bit wider, but I'm gonna be somewhat careful. I'm gonna use one other rib tool, and this is the yellow. And I'll show you how I use the rib tools on both sides of the wall for final shaping, right? So I'll use the yellow rib tool inside. This just helps maintain a little bit of stability, having that equal pressure from both sides, I find, and you'll take very little slip off on that last go around. Right, so then the last thing I'm going to attend to very carefully and gingerly is the rim. Right, I just want to smooth it out, and you'll see I've got a little undulation, which nothing's perfect. Right. You could certainly do a little flared rim if you want, something like that. But just to give you some perspective, this pot is 7 inches tall and 11.5 inches in diameter. 7 pounds of clay. Bottom is still on the thicker side, which is also nice for use in the kitchen so that the bowl doesn't slide around a lot when you're mixing out of it. So hopefully you got some tips and tricks and golden nuggets. Go make your big mixing bowl.